good to be back with you all. My name is Antoine C. Wright, and it's good to be able to host another edition of the Christian Recorder Dialogues. Shout out to my home bishop in the mighty seventh, Bishop Davis, and all the work that's going on and taking place in the mighty seventh. And certainly cannot forget to shout out the 133rd elected and consecrated bishop of the AME Church, my uncle, Bishop C. Wright, and the work that he is doing in his new Episcopal assignment. There's so much going on. There's so much happening, but I am so excited about today's dialogue. There's a wonderful passage of scripture that I referenced so many times throughout my career, my professional career, and I think it really captures the conversation we will have today. The scripture is simply iron sharpens iron. And I have been the beneficiary of being sharpened by so many incredible leaders throughout my career, but none in my most recent career have I been more influenced and inspired by other than the young man who we will have some serious dialogue and engagement with today. He has put his footprint in the sand and the sea in Washington, D.C., all across the country. He's a husband, he's a father, he's a lawyer, he's a political strategist, he's a policy advisor. He served two former presidents, both Clinton and Obama. He currently serves on the board of directors for the Obama administration. The Obama Foundation, the Black Economic Alliance. He chairs the My Brother's Keepers Advisory Council. And I've heard this young man before I met him being referenced as a sweet brother. Broderick Johnson leads Comcast public engagement and digital opportunity teams. He works closely with government and community leaders all across this country, and his passion and his plea has been to close the digital divide in communities that have traditionally been left out and left behind all across this country throughout the history of this country. In his current role at Comcast, he's the Executive Vice President of Digital Opportunity and the Executive Vice President of Public Policy. But more importantly, he is my friend. And as I often say in public and in private, the true measure of your friendships is those who will defend you and advocate for you in your absence. I consider Broderick Johnson a friend. Broderick, welcome to the Christian Recorder Dialogue.
Antoine, thank you. I'm very glad to be here, and I feel the same way about you, brother. And I also want to thank you for referring to me as a young man, because I certainly oftentimes feel that way. But as you were going through my bio a bit, I thought, who is that guy he's introducing? Because sometimes, to be honest, sometimes I'm really filled with incredible emotion and appreciation for the things that I have thus far been able to do in my lifetime.
Well, Broderick, I think most of us can summarize our journeys in life as we've come this far by faith, leaning on the Lord, trusting in his holy word. He's never failed us yet. And I think you know what that means, and I think you exemplify that. But more importantly, you stay true to that throughout your career.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
And Broderick, we want to get right into it. I certainly thank you for, taking the time. I know you're a busy schedule. Shout out to your team, who I get a chance to work closely with on a regular basis. Work, Eric and Keisha and so many others on the team. Just shout out to them for making this a priority, treating the Christian Recorder and the AME Church as a priority, not an option. Broderick, in private, we've often talked about this, but I do want to open this up publicly a little bit. You have been unapologetic about sharing how important your faith has been to bring you to where you are. I've had a up close and personal opportunity to be with you and hear from you about your journey, but talk about how your faith has really shaped and molded who you are, both as a man and as a professional.
Antoine, thank you for giving me the opportunity to start this conversation with that, because it really does go to the foundation of who I am and why, again, I'm so honored to be able to do both personally and professionally the work that I get to do. I was born and raised in Baltimore, Maryland, a city that I'm incredibly proud of. I was raised by God-fearing family, parents who were committed to make sure that that I had and my sisters had the opportunity through education and otherwise to pursue dreams that they had not been able to pursue, but also to insist that we pursue, whether it was our education or professional or how we conducted ourselves in ways that were true to our faith. I was born in the 50s and grew up in the 60s in Baltimore at a very tumultuous time in the city, the assassination of Dr. King and the riots that followed. So that's where it was so important to have a very strong foundation of faith and values. I would like to say I was raised as a Matthew 25 Catholic. Social justice is right at the core of that passage from Scripture. It's where Jesus talks about the principle of whatever you do for the least of your brothers and sisters, you do for him. And throughout my career, then, whether it's about providing resources, my own personal commitment to trying to make sure that equality and opportunity were available to all people, that has really driven me. And I used to wonder why I was so driven, other than the fact that certainly my parents insisted on it. But I think a big part of it too, quite frankly, is my father insisted that my middle name be DePore, and Saint Martin DePore is recognized as the first canonized saint in the Catholic Church of color. And turned out, I found out many decades later, actually, that he's the patron saint of social justice. So for me, I have no other choice but to be concerned and to dedicate myself, again, personally and professionally, to achieving equality and opportunity and social justice for all. Again, I've been so blessed throughout my life, and that it's really, really grounded in my faith.
Well, I just appreciate the fact that you have not made it to where you are and forgotten about other people. I work so closely with Keisha on your team, and she is just one example how you have pulled up several seats and not left anyone on the menu, but instead you have expanded the table for so many of us and gave us seats to sit in. Otherwise, we would not even be in the room. So I thank you for living out your faith, not just talking the talk, but walking the walk.
Absolutely.
Broderick, when I talk to my mentor and political father and hero, Jim Clyburn, when we talk about, I call him the broadband man, but when we talk about the internet, two things that often come up in our conversation. One is internet to the 21st century is what electricity was to the 20th century. And he says that organizations and government have to make certain that they do not worry about 4G, 5G, or 6G, but we take care of the people with no G. And I think that's kind of summarized the work you do in your role at Comcast. And Comcast has been a frontline leader in closing the digital divide and expanding digital opportunity. How would you define this big fancy phrase, digital opportunity, and why is this issue so important to you both personally and professionally?
Yes, so I want to refer to the definition, and we have adopted here at Comcast, of digital opportunity, because it's so important to understand what digital opportunity and closing the digital divide means, especially in these times. So let me just read our definition real quickly. At Comcast, we define digital opportunity as the ability to take advantage of the life-changing improvements that digital inclusion unlocks. So when individuals and communities have connections, have the infrastructure for the internet, but also have appropriate devices, have access to digital skills and digital skills training, and learn how to use the internet, then it gives them the opportunity to improve so many things about their own lives, from employment to education to housing and healthcare outcomes. And Antoine, it's not just about access, the infrastructure, and we'll talk about that certainly a bit here. It's not so much, for many people, it's not about access or the infrastructure or having access to the internet, but it's about adoption. It's about taking it, understanding what's available, and then taking advantage of it because you understand the impact it can have on your life, your family's life, your community's life. So in our definition, as we talk about digital opportunity, it's an emphasis on both access, but also on adopting the internet, subscribing the internet, using the internet to bring about changes, improvements in the life of an individual or their family or community. This is something that I would just say, you asked me also in terms of my own kind of professional commitment to this. When I worked for President Clinton, it was when closing the digital divide had just started to become a real strong public policy initiative and priority for him. And back then, we talked about closing the digital divide as meaning being able to have a computer in every classroom. Mm-hmm. It was really at that. You think about it now, it wasn't all that audacious. But back then, it seemed very audacious. So going back for several decades for me, I've been able to work on these issues. And then coming to Comcast, I've been here for 4 years in this role that I have this really enormous opportunity to use the resources and commitment of a company so committed to closing the digital divide and providing digital opportunity. It's like so much of my career, fortunately, has come together to lead to this moment to do this work with great colleagues.
Broderick, we went through a once-in-a-century global pandemic not too long ago. Very recent history. I said publicly on day 2 of that pandemic, when America had a cough, Black America had the flu. When it was sprinkling in America, it was flooding in our community. Yeah. And that impact went on to be so transformational and transitional. We lost so many lives. We were exposed of the many fault lines that exist in our country, from education to healthcare to employment and others. From your experience, having gone through that pandemic and having worked in the corporate world and having helped usher a company through that and making certain that individuals did not lack in the things that they were needed to for survival. In your experience, what are some of these most significant barriers preventing full digital inclusion in our communities today, particularly in the so-called underserved, left out, left behind, least of these, the ones that are mentioned in Matthew 25 and 40?
Yeah. So Antoine, we've done a lot of analysis and research around these barriers, because oftentimes, again, when people discuss what the challenges are for people being able to use the internet, having access to the internet, being able to close the disparities around the internet or the things that can be available, oftentimes the conversation will sort of get off target, in that people will talk about access as, for example, the big barrier. And yet we know access, infrastructure, in 98% of urban communities, infrastructure access is not really the challenge. The challenge is about adoption or subscribing to the internet and being able to subscribe to affordable internet. Now in rural America, and that's where, again, certainly many of our folks are centered, access infrastructure is a challenge. Only 80% of rural America has the infrastructure. But we have this unprecedented opportunity, of course, because of the federal funding that came about under the infrastructure law that the Biden-Harris administration was able to achieve. And now the monies, billions and billions of dollars, will go out to help solve that infrastructure divide. But again, whether it's urban or rural, when you combine them together, Antoine, 94% of our country has the infrastructure to be able to subscribe to the internet. So it's about adoption. Now, what are the barriers? Again, through research, analysis, talking to people, because it's important to talk to folks, of course, where they are. When you have access that's been addressed, again, largely in this country it has been, the barriers have to do with things that are no surprise. Lack of trust in whether it's government or business, that in fact, when I say, it's important to have access to use the internet, oftentimes trust can be a barrier. Devices, a lot of people don't have access. They don't have access at home to a laptop or another device that can really bring the fruits of internet to folks. Skills training, a lot of people are intimidated by the internet, and they need to develop the skills and have the training to make them more literate and to be able to be comfortable using the internet. And then relevance, I'd say, and we'll focus on that because it's very important, certainly in talking about what happens through the work that we're doing with houses of worship, is to help people understand why it is that the internet is so important for so many things in their lives. So there are a lot of barriers. We can achieve great things by tearing down those barriers, but that involves partnerships.
You know, Broderick, during the pandemic, I was able to go volunteer at a senior center because I had a lot of time on my hands. And I said to one of the lovely seasoned saints that was sitting there, I said, do you know how, did you see that mouse? And she said, oh, Lord, Lord have mercy. I hope we don't have no mice in here. So when you talk about the digital divide and opportunities and just general education about the internet and computer literacy and all those things, I tell you, we not only have work to do, but it cuts across many lines, from educational to age, gender to socioeconomic status. Is so important. It's so important. And you know, just continuing on the drumbeat of the theme of the pandemic, because it had so much impact. And as we say in the neighborhood, it really took our shirt off and exposed us in many ways that we did not anticipate.
That's right.
You know, one of the true exposures we saw was with the church.
Yeah.
Particularly the modern day church. Those who were not able to, or were not in a position before the pandemic to have their services streamed online for whatever reason. Can you talk about how the impact of technology and the capabilities of what Comcast is doing in terms of the internet, how that impacts the needs of churches and the communities they serve?
Absolutely. And that's certainly a big reason why we are at Comcast, through the digital opportunity work, so focused on houses of worship. And I'm going to use the term church as I talk about this, but what I have to say, Antoine, applies certainly to not just what we would consider to be churches, but also temples and synagogues and mosques. But I'll refer to churches in sort of the shorthand. Mm-hmm. So without question, right, during the pandemic, all the places that people needed, whether it was their jobs or their churches or their schools or healthcare, as they closed, it brought to bear an even greater danger in terms of the digital divide. And specific to churches, people were then, if the churches didn't stream services or didn't have other ways to virtually do things that were important to their congregations, people were left out and starved for things that were so important to their lives. And so I had this fireside chat earlier, last year actually, with Reverend Dr. Franklin Richardson, and he is a pastor of a great church in Mount Vernon, New York. He's also the chair of the board of the National Action Network, mm-hmm. and chair of the National Conference of Black Churches. And we had a fireside conversation about churches and the importance of technology and the internet for churches. And he's done some writing on this as well. And, you know, what he said was there sort of were three categories then of churches in terms of the impact of the pandemic. If they didn't have access to the internet, didn't have internet capabilities, couldn't stream services, then many of these institutions just closed, couldn't operate anymore. People weren't attending, but they also couldn't contribute. They're really cut off from their congregation. So that's one category, those that closed. Second were those that, because they had some internet capability, some technology, they survived, and they were able to continue to provide some services. By services, both services that you think of in terms of church services, but also employment-related services, healthcare-related services they would provide. But they were able to do it at a very minimal level. And then, Antoine, he talked about those that thrived. Mm-hmm. If a church had already been investing in the internet and in technology before the pandemic, they certainly found that they could thrive during the pandemic because mm-hmm. people could continue, right, to do the things that were important to them as members of that particular church community. So those are the three categories that he talked about. But he also talked about how it was important then for churches to change the way they operated. If you, even now, as we've largely come out of the pandemic, there are a lot of churches that used to have 2 or 3 services on a Sunday. They found that they could have one service in person on a Sunday, but they could also have a virtual service that they could do later in the day, and that allowed them not only to hold on to the congregations that they had, but also to expand to other people who, for a variety of reasons, could not in person attend churches anyway. So leveraging technology, a critical issue for churches, and it has had a tremendous impact on the ability of churches to continue to be connected to their congregants.
Broderick, in traveling the country in my political consulting role, when you talk to pastors and you visit churches and communities all across the country, you get consistent feedback. One, churches have grown as a result of being able to have more people worship online and worship in non-traditional ways. And so has the offering plates.
Yes, there's that too, right?
They have grown. And more people are tuning in, and you can do Jesus on Sunday while you're cooking Sunday dinner. If little one happens to get sick because of Comcast and because of their leadership in the service area, people are able to take care of their sick children or sick spouse or whatever the case may be, catch up on work, and not miss the word of God. And I think that's critical. And the one thing the church has to do, like some of our friends in the political space, we've got to figure out even more how to meet people where they are.
That's right.
I think the innovation with the internet and the work that Comcast is doing gives all of us an opportunity to be met where we are.
Yeah, and we certainly, Antoine, we can focus on what the challenges are, the problems that the pandemic created, and the challenges around AI and technology and all those things that can intimidate people oftentimes and create a sense of dread and fear for some folks. But you have these opportunities, again, because of the unprecedented amount of investments being made by both the government, but also by the private sector, the involvement of nonprofit organizations and partnerships to be able to address these issues. We can either have a bigger set of digital divide problems, or we can really get about closing the digital divide decisively by being able to tap into things that are really becoming abundantly available to many folks.
Staying on the church beat, a few weeks ago, I had the opportunity to be with you and Keisha and Eric and others on the team at the Great Elijah Cummings Church.
That's right.
And it was a prime example of how private and public can work together for good. It was a fireside chat, more of a round table. By the way, food was good. Thank you.
Because it was in Baltimore. Come on. We didn't have crab cakes, but we'll work on that next time.
It was a roundtable in your home turf of Baltimore, talking about both the challenges and opportunities that exist. But it's a friendly reminder of how when the Black church leads, our country and our community succeed. I believe that. And I know we use the term church in a very broad way, but can you talk about, from your vantage point, how can churches build the gap and lead on efforts like this, but also work together in the private sector with companies like Comcast and the work you all are doing in the faith space to help make sure that communities not only survive, but they thrive?
Yeah, it's absolutely. I'm glad to be able to talk about that, Antoine, because as I'd mentioned earlier, and we talked about the barriers that oftentimes, of course, get in the way of people not using the internet when it's accessible to them and when it's affordable to them. Trust as a big barrier. And what we discovered then, certainly over our work and over the research, is that you need to identify who the trusted messengers are in communities in order to help close the digital divide and convince people of the digital opportunities before them. We call these individuals, we call these organizations that are well trusted and that work with us and others, digital navigators. Again, and trust is a big factor. So when you think about, well, who else is deeply trusted in communities, it's the leaders of faith communities. It's the people who participate in their churches and provide the kind of comfort to people, the kind of confidence that they can believe that what is being said is honest because it's someone that they trust because they serve God together. And so churches are so ideal to be partners in this work and to help lead this work because of their deep local roots, again, because they are trusted voices and they are mission driven. And I'd say that, besides this being a very important sort of public policy issue to get, it is a mission driven issue for us as well, because it is so fundamentally important. And so for churches and members of churches and leaders of churches, being mission driven is right at the core of what it is, of course, that they do. So churches are ideal for us to partner with in this work. And we're seeing amazing results, including what you mentioned about that incredible church there in Baltimore, not too far from where I actually went to high school.
Well, it's good that you understand and you live out the idea that giving back is the price of admission for moving forward, because in your role, you can choose to test drive programs
right
wherever you want to, but you specifically intentionally chose a community that you grew up in, because you're the homeboy that's done good. I think that's good, but we have to make certain project in all of our roles that we allow that to spread like wildfire.
Right.
Because there's so many communities, both rural, urban, and suburban, who are just hungry and thirsty for the smallest thing. Again, forget about 4G, 5G. We're talking about people with no G.
Yeah.
And I think that's important for us to shape going forward. I know you're short on time, but I want to just get into one or two more things. We often talk about the problems, but we talk about the options and the opportunity. We have an incredible, and I say the collective we, the church, corporations like Comcast, and the community have an incredible opportunity to close the digital divide. What is at stake for these communities if we don't address these forget about gaps, these big old holes in the road that hinder us from making progress?
Yeah. So first I want to say that I want to be very somewhat tangible about what it is that churches can do themselves or working with partners, whether it be nonprofit organizations or with Comcast. They can organize digital skills workshops at their churches. We see this in a lot of churches. It is so important, right, in these times for people who are seeking employment or who are seeking, upward mobility with their employer or a new employer or a new business, to have digital skills. 92%, this is just an astounding statistic, Antoine, but 92% of today's jobs across sectors, right, require a person to have at least one digital skill. And that number is only going to get higher.
But Broderick, say that number again.
92% of today.
And testify what you believe to be a digital skill is, because I don't want nobody to leave here thinking that's just logging on Facebook.
No. It can mean so. Right. So for someone in the service industry, I've seen this and going to places, whether stores like Walmart or Costco or somewhere else. So service industry jobs or CVS people. Of course, in order to maintain good sense of inventory, in order to help people, check out at the register, they have to have certainly a skill that allows them to be able to go on a computer network in order to be able to make those judgments and to help people, right? And that is, again, it's across businesses. Think about restaurants and what happens in restaurants oftentimes when you're placing an order. Or when you think about what you can do at home, for example, and we all do this so much more now than we probably should, or being able to order food online. Someone's got to be able to take and translate what it is that you sent right online into making sure that your order gets to you. So that 92% number, again, it shows how ubiquitous it is for people to have at least one digital skill. But we want to certainly go beyond it, Antoine, and say, having one digital skill is great. Many jobs are requiring multiple digital skills. And if, again, a person wants to be upwardly mobile, and the vast majority of people certainly do, or to become very successful entrepreneurs with global reach in their businesses, having those digital skills is extremely important. So again, churches can help set up digital skills workshops. They can set up computer labs in their churches. We've even got churches, by the way, to participate with us in our Lift Zones program. We have over 1,250 what we call Lift Zones. These are community-based centers across our footprint where people can go and learn how to use the computer and learn about all of the things that the internet can bring to them as well. So again, churches, trusted places people are comfortable, can offer a whole lot of those very specific opportunities to people to help close this digital divide and bring about digital opportunity.
Broderick, I'm gonna end on this thought and question, and I just want to hear from you on this. Taking off your Comcast hat for a second, but just personally, because every time you and I chat, I get a little nugget of wisdom to help me run on to see what the end is gonna be. But there are a lot of people in this very moment who are just losing faith in the process. In some cases, losing faith in the church. They're losing faith in government. They're losing faith in their fellow neighbors. They're just losing faith in the idea and the sense of community. And it's certain they're losing faith in just process, thinking that something as simple as the internet and having access can be a must for them, not a plus.
Absolutely.
What do you say to people in that moment who are in that space where there's just uncertainty outweighs and outrules everything?
It's got to be, as my old boss, President Obama, would say often, don't give in to the cynicism. And that was almost a decade ago, which is really pretty amazing, when he was sharing that with all of his staff as we got toward the end of his administration, and he was, encouraging us to continue to believe in this system. And that was in 2016, heading into 2017, especially. That still holds true today, to not give in to cynicism. But, it's not enough to just tell people, not to give in to negative things or to believe that things won't get better. Antoine, I have seen it. I am so blessed to be able to go around the country and to sit in these sessions with people who are learning how to use the internet, whether it be seniors, whether it be children, whether it be adults who are interested in trying to identify new jobs or whatever else. And the sense of hope and optimism I get out of those sessions makes me believe that the internet is so important to being able to make sure that people see things in a positive way and believe that despite how challenging, how unprecedented the times are that we are in, that withdrawing from all of this and closing themselves off from technologies and the ability to learn new information is so important. And also to be able to distinguish misinformation from genuine information and what's really important. And again, I would just say, Antoine, we have to keep coming back to the things that make using the internet relevant to people's lives. People want a good job, and they want a job that's going to pay them well, wages. They want to make sure that they can be able to take advantage of jobs that will pay more. And we've seen, certainly through the data that we've looked at, how important it is the internet to be able to do that as well. Healthcare. We know without question that people who are able to make doctor's appointments virtually without having to necessarily leave their homes, or to be able to get information that is important to their health and well-being, is good as well. And the last thing I'll say is the joy that comes from access to the internet and using the internet. And I oftentimes will cite the example that I had about 2 years ago in Houston of the African-American senior who was participating in a digital navigators program that we were working with down in Houston. And this gentleman, when I asked him what made having the internet so important to him, said that not only could he stay in touch with his children and grandchildren, but he could watch reruns of one of his favorite TV shows, and that was Gunsmoke, which played for 20 years. And so he could watch episode after episode after episode. And the smile on his face when he told me that, I never have forgotten that story. And God bless him. I hope he's still enjoying that. That means a lot for many people.
Well, Broderick, man, thank you.
Thank you.
Proverbs 29:2 says the people rejoice when the righteous are in charge, but the people moan when the wicked rule. People are rejoicing in communities all across the country because people like you are in charge at places like Comcast, who are on the front line doing the work, making the internet accessible and affordable. Thank you for being my friend.
Sure.
Thank you for taking the time. Thank you,
Hey,
Keith, Eric,
Antoine.
and to your team for all that you all are doing to work together to make certain that communities all across the country not just survive, but they thrive.
I hope you don't mind. I want to close with this, Antoine.
Please.
Of course, the great Congressman John Lewis said several years ago, he was always quite prophetic, but he said, access to the internet is the civil rights issue of the 21st century.
Wow.
If we look at it that way, then we can't help but continue to wage this important battle. So thank you. Thank you for allowing me to close with that.
Well, that's our benediction. All hearts and minds are clear. Roger, thank you. For those who tuned in, thank you so much for tuning in. I'll see you guys soon. More importantly, keep the faith. God is with us, and he has never failed us yet. Take care.